Even though there had already been only 2 Road Rash titles for the Sega Genesis in 1990 and 1991 respectively, Trip Hopkins, chairman and one of the co-founders of Electronic Arts, was developing a new system to enter into the video game market and change the way gamers experience playing their games. Or at least that was what they said for advertising purposes. One of the forefront titles to showcase the 3DO platform and show the next evolutionary step in the video game business was to reboot the Road Rash franchise with a standalone title. That title ended up getting released on many other systems, however, besides the 3DO, like the PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and PC. So, while the game can unofficially be called Road Rash 3DO, it can also be considered the 3rd title in the Road Rash franchise. So what did gamers get from Electronic Arts in this new Road Rash reboot for a new console? Well, it got the usual works, including upgraded graphics, a new campaign mode, a similar 5-track setting, and it also got full motion videos. Oh yes, this game was released during the full motion video boom of the early to mid 90s, so we got a decent assortment of different types of videos for winning races, losing races, getting busted by the cops, and trashing your bike. It also got a unique selling point that made the game really stand out. Now, the other unique element for this game is it managed to get a little something called, licensed music from several notable bands. Now that was pretty cool. Now, as licensed music had not been used very often during this period of time, it was very, very nice to see, and it showed the power of the CD-ROM of the day. As stated in an interview with Retro Gamer, this was one of the first times the developers had to negotiate with the record labels themselves in licensing music for the video game. It's certainly not like today where there's all these rules and such. Back then it was a brand new experience for all parties involved. It went beyond the whole movie to video game tie-in negotiations you saw. Now the game includes selected cuts from Soundgarden, Therapy, Monster Magnet, Paw, and several others. Overall, it was a good selection of music from the time period. So outside of these cosmetic features of the game, Road Rash decided to use many of the existing features and ideas from past entries in the series and create a new experience with new graphics, sound, music, and some different gameplay modes, although to be honest, a lot of them were the same, with a bit tweaking here and there. However, Road Rash for the PC and other consoles was really just a nice fancy remake of the original game, and it would have been great to see more risks taken with this new entry in the series. The game also pays homage to the first Road Rash title by going back to the California setting, with a couple of tracks even reappearing on this compilation, Sierra Nevada and Pacific Coast. The other 3 tracks are new in scope, and right away you can see what kind of scenery the developers were trying to utilize for this compilation. This is the first Road Rash game that would use city streets and environments for all the racing action, or for a majority of it I should say. Considering the amount of detail and attention the developers place on these areas, this was one way for the developers to really show off some new ideas when it came to racing areas, but also show off the power of the 3DO and other systems. It's a pretty unique idea, and it actually works out pretty well, as you have to contend with traffic, pedestrians on a much, much smaller scale, making the game more challenging than you would on the highway roads. However, this entry in the Road Rash series didn't really break new ground in terms of the actual tracks. It still uses the same 5-track option throughout the game, and each new level simply increases the length of the race, and other than upgrading your bike to keep up with the competition in big game mode, there really isn't a whole lot else to do in the game. One of the notable changes though that was kind of unique was branching elements. They added a bit of variety to the game because every now and again you could go left or right, and depending on your choice you may end up on a better or worse path. So it wasn't just, the track in a mountain area or anything. You actually had different options, and it actually did change up the gameplay somewhat. Not significantly, but somewhat. It would have been great had the developers added some actual substance to the game, considering it's a reboot and all. Now, comparison to Road Rash 3, that game would actually add more tracks, more weapons, actual obstacles, and overall that game made it a much more challenging and engaging experience for racers. Now, remember me mentioning about the whole licensed music aspect of the game? Well, it was a damn shame that you can only hear the songs in the main menu. That's right, once you start racing, you actually get some pretty bland selections. certainly nowhere near as memorable as the cuts chosen in Road Rash 1 and 2. And that was on the Mega Drive, for goodness sakes, and those music tracks sounded a heck of a whole lot better than they do here. Now, as stated again in an interview with Retro Gamer, the developers themselves did want to include licensed music during the races, but due to technical issues and time, they just weren't able to implement it in time for the release, which was a damn shame, since we got such a boring and generic music in its place. Man, if only they could have done it at the time. Now, while the game certainly looks and plays alright, there were certain liberties taken in regards to certain gameplay elements, most notably the fighting. Now, the whole fighting element of Road Rash has always been a big selling point in the series, but this time around it really felt like it was an afterthought to the whole experience. It seemed the developers spent more time making the world look nice and trying to make each track stand out somewhat, but the fighting element really does seem out of place. It's difficult to actually engage in fisticuffs with your opponents, and only once you get to the higher levels in the game does it actually seem to become a factor once again. Heck, you can actually avoid fighting with your opponents for most of the game, as they generally leave you alone. Now, one of the other notable areas that's very strangely handled this time around is the whole notion of hitting cars and other obstacles. Now, you would think you hit a car or obstacle, you go flying off your bike, and then you race back to your bike, like in the other Road Rash titles. Well, guess what? It's not handled like that at all. Sometimes, depending on the speed that you're driving, you may bounce off a car or other obstacle. Yup, you heard that right. You're on a motorbike and you hit a car and you may just bounce off of it. It really seems quite random because sometimes you end up bouncing off these obstacles and other times you will crash over them. I mean, what the heck just happened? I mean, considering that this was launching on a new console, this entry in the Road Rash series could have really stood out and really shown the power of the 3DO and other consoles. It, however, took the existing ideas of past Road Rash games and maintained the status quo. They didn't try to be innovative or take any risk, which was a damn shame. Now, I understand that it is a Road Rash title and they shouldn't have changed the gameplay radically, but it would have been cool to see a lot of the same gameplay additions that they would do in Road Rash 3, for example. There were more obstacles, weapons, more tracks, and it was still the Road Rash game that we knew and loved. However, this game tried to be unique and different, and it didn't do so very well with some of the broken gameplay modifications of fighting and actual obstacles. So if you want to track down the copy of the game, because you're a fan of this series, you can't go wrong, and if you enjoy it in short bursts, you'll have a lot of fun with it. Still, if you're looking for a better Road Rash game, pick up Road Rash 3 or some of the other future Road Rash titles. But for a new console entry, this Road Rash title missed the mark significantly.